jump in and give their 2 cents worth, but we will try desperately to control it well. On that note, Julie, do you want to just run it like you do a county council meeting? It's probably quicker, more efficient that way.
Certainly, but I would suggest that perhaps Jim, who worked on compiling the agenda, might be a more appropriate person to run us through the agenda.
That's fine. I have no problem with that. Normally, I talk too much, so Jim, if you're more than willing to do that, then that's super, and then we'll just try and stick to the agenda. I think the biggest thing we have to decide is how we move the project forward and when.
Okay. Maybe the first thing we should do is approve the minutes from the last meeting, Councillor Purcell. Chairman Purcell.
Okay, can we get a mover and a seconder for the minutes of the last meeting?
So moved, Mennel.
Second, Marks.
Okay, all in favor? Dave?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Okay, that motion's carried.
Okay, and next then what we had on the agenda was the discussion around the site tour for bidders.
This is the important part of it, and I'm going to quickly cut to the chase. The site tour can't happen until Julie and Michelle tell us it can happen, and we can actually get into the building. And that means everything is stalled at this stage. All I'm asking, and then I'll go around the table for the council members, because all the committee members that are real working people on this committee are fully aware of all the issues. But at this stage, I think the best we can do is toss it back to the committee and to Julie and have them work out a plan going forward. If it appears that we're not going to be able to get access in a semi-normal manner, the kind of thing they should consider is we could send people in there in full hazmat suits. Every construction company has that type of stuff available, and there might be safe ways we can do it, because once you get them in there and they do their tour, they should be able to do all the rest of the work without having to go back again. Also, we can use all kinds of photographs and diagrams, or they can just talk to David or somebody has intimate knowledge of the building. Once we get past that obstacle, I think we can move on, because all the construction is going to be outside, and we may have to modify it slightly by not tearing out a wall or not doing any of the connections initially. Might be a little disjointed, but at least we can move on. Just before I go on with that, I'd like some expert feedback. David, do you think we can figure something out like that?
I'll comment briefly, and then I'd like Steve Willis or Daryl, if he's also on the line, to comment on the logistics of having a bidder's tour or some surrogate. The design would have to change somewhat, because even if we could arrange some method to get bidders through or provide information to them, one of the first steps is abatement of asbestos and the construction of a small housekeeping room, because when we make our structural connection, we're eliminating a housekeeping room. So the alternative is to change the design and the sequencing so that the connection, as you suggested in your commentary, Bob, might be delayed until much later in the construction sequence, and that's something that we'd have to meet with D. Grant and our structural engineer to assess how that could be achieved. It would add some cost. How much is unknown at this point, until we come up with a revised strategy to start construction for maybe up to a year before you would actually have to have any intervention inside the building. Steve, your thoughts?
Okay.
Yeah, to comment on the bidder site tour. So certainly since the COVID pandemic has started, we've still seen a number of tenders be issued and have closed. A number of site tours have gone virtual by way of whether a WebEx or a Zoom, where the host can show either photos or and kind of complete the tour by referencing the drawings and perhaps from a photo library. So there certainly are ways around that we've seen. Alternatively, a number of photos or video perhaps could be uploaded and issued by way of an addendum or with the original documents. The bidders could view the photos and the video from a link. So I think there are ways to get around the hurdle of the mandatory bidder site tour. With respect to revising the phasing so that we can commence the work without entering the facility. Yeah, certainly would like to meet with Dave and the structural engineer to go over that, because we're as eager as anyone to get started with this project. So.
If I may, Mr. Chair, on behalf of county staff, as it pertains to our building condition assessment of all corporate facilities, we're just awaiting, and to pick up on some of the commentary that Steve just made, we're awaiting delivery of technology expected to be delivered on Sunday that allow us to take 360-degree internal, capture internal images and or video for which we could certainly provide if that's the betterment and allows us to proceed in that regard.
Okay, do any of the, other than the politicians online, does anybody else want to make some comments before I get comments from each of them? Okay, just basically, it sounds like we may have some solutions. They will mean it's going to be delayed. It will also mean we're going to be extremely careful, and we will stop if we can't do it right. And it may entail some additional costs, which we don't know about yet, simply because of the way we're going to have to coordinate the construction going forward if we want to get going. The other alternative is you put a full stop in place for at least a year and try and figure out where you're going from there, which I don't recommend. But I'd like to go around the table and at least get the committee members' input before we move off this topic. Could I start with Tom?
Well, I'm not going to make any suggestions. I'd rather have trained staff and do their job and give us good advice. But certainly I want to keep moving cautiously, but keep it going.
Okay, and Mary?
Thanks, Bob. I agree with Tom. I'd like to see it keep moving if possible, but I know we have to proceed cautiously and slowly. And I don't want, any risks taken. We've got to be very careful about this.
Okay, and David?
Well, I'm very comfortable with the virtual tour. Obviously, staff can do the virtual tour and not compromise anything. And if the potential bidders are comfortable with that, I think that's the direction to go. We can move on, not take any risks, and if, like I say, if the bidders, that's the key, is if the bidders are ready to go ahead with the virtual tour. I think that's the way.
Okay, Jim, are you comfortable with that direction?
I am, Mr. Chair, but I think Michelle probably would have more to say than I do in terms of from the operations of the home and her comfort level.
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit. I looked at the agenda this morning and I did decide to reach out to public health and have some conversation. Certainly a virtual tour would be our preference. But if there was, I did share that we've been delayed because this was supposed to happen in March and pandemic came at the same time. So we are in discussion as to potentially, if we were to allow bidders to come on site, what that might look like. So preference of having only one company coming in at a time with a maximum number persons from that company coming in, plus either Brian or Cole, needing to know that those individuals coming in have been following social distancing practices and recommendations in their own work life as well as their own personal life, needing to ensure that they pass the screening and that they're using good hand hygiene on arrival once they pass, and a mask as being the appropriate choice of PPE. Had discussion around full PPE, but again, I'm waiting for final direction because my contact at Public Health who wanted to take it to senior management there to get some further advice. I was hoping she'd be emailing me back, but I keep watching my phone here. I haven't seen anything yet. We do have a number of vacant rooms at this time because we were in outbreak for 2 months. So I was hoping to get some information today from the group as to the full extent of requirements for the tour. So are they needing to go in on every resident home area? Could it be just one resident home area that we could potentially remove individuals to other areas of the home if we scheduled certain times of day, and what would be the anticipated length of time of the tour? Wanting to make sure that there was no resident contact. So a change that's happened in our homes because of pandemic is we weren't able to continue to have residents dine in the dining room. So they are dining in the resident home areas because we have to provide 6 feet of social distancing. So they're dining in their rooms, they're dining in the hallways, they're dining in the lounges, large number of tables spread throughout at Terrace Lodge to try and accommodate this. But if we knew, for example, that a tour could be completed in an hour at lunchtime when you only needed the lower south wing, potentially that day we could bring those 25 residents out to the main dining room that day for a scheduled tour. So I need some more information to take back to Public Health as to the extent of the needs for the tour and the time frame, and how many individuals we would need to, or how many different companies we would need to accommodate potentially this request. So
okay, Michelle, I'm gonna slightly interrupt because of our time restraints, but I think I heard from Steve and David and Brian that only our staff through Brian's office would have to have access to the building, that he would provide the documentation either through photos or video or whatever he has to do, and he can work that out with them, which greatly simplifies the access to the building and the control of anybody bringing in exposure into the building. The second, that's how we would get around the tour, and they can correct me if I'm wrong on that, Steve or David. That's correct.
That's correct. We've seen a number of projects toured that way.
So that means you only have to deal with Brian, and Brian has to use his technology and his expertise with these guys to get that done. So that makes that part of it simple. The tougher part will be what's it going to cost us to use that information to start the build, but in a disjointed manner without any disruption of the existing building. And that's what we will all have to just hold our breath and allow David and Steve and Brian and Jim to pull all those numbers together and tell us what that means. That may mean that, yes, we can go ahead and do that, or it may mean that we have to delay the whole thing. But at least we can get the tour done, I believe, in a safe manner if you're comfortable only dealing with Brian and his group. Does that make sense?
that would be the preference.
Okay.
So yes.
Everybody else okay with that direction? It looks like that's okay on that direction. And then the second part of it is we don't know what it means, the changes on how you go about the construction. And their assignment will be to go away and figure that out and come back and tell us what they can do, what they cannot do, and give us their best guess on what's viable and what isn't. Is that fair for David and Steve?
Yes,
Jim?
we'll have to have a meeting set up to with staff and D-Grant and Tacoma to assess how we can push out any intervention in the existing building for as long as possible, and theoretically maybe up to a year. The one other thing, Bob, before we finish at 1:30, I think it's important to hear from Steve Willis, who is D-Grant's senior estimator, what sort of cost premium attributed to COVID-19 that D-Grant's been experiencing relative to pre-COVID. That, right now the context is we have about 7.5% in our budget that was attributed to escalation, but COVID cost premium or escalation it all comes out of the same pot.
Well, to answer that, David, since the pandemic, we've seen a number of tenders still issued and closed, and the market's still aggressive. Numbers are competitive. They're still, I think there was a time period there when things first went down early March, or mid-March, when some companies maybe slowed down for a week or so in terms of bidding, but certainly in the last few weeks, we've seen significant coverage on major packages, and haven't seen any escalation compared to numbers prior to. So the answer this time is no, there hasn't been any premium that we've witnessed to date.
That's very good news. You have I would suggest one of the best senses of the construction marketplace in southwestern Ontario. So anecdotally, we've heard in Hamilton that HTS, a major mechanical equipment manufacturer, has, this goes back a month, added 30% on top of their equipment prices, part of that because of the US dollar, but not that certainly doesn't explain all 30%. And that 3 weeks ago, we had a condo project close where the mechanical budget was $32,000 a suite, and it came in at $40,000. So those sorts of, and that's in the Kitchener area. So those sorts of numbers would very quickly kill a budget. But if what you're getting in the London marketplace is little or no impact, that's also a strong suggestion that we want to figure out a way that we can go ahead with pricing as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, in the London region, like I said, we've closed a number of tenders, and each project is obviously different in its own way, but the numbers have remained consistent and aggressive as they were prior to the pandemic. So.
Okay, I'm going to jump in again as Bob. With regards to that, if we see that happening here, just give us a heads up very quickly, because I would view that as the gouging that Premier Ford would love to talk to those people directly, personally. And if they want to stay in business in our province, I suspect that shouldn't be happening. Okay. With regards to any legitimate additional costs for COVID, I'm sure Jim's all over it, but set that aside in a separate bin so we can claim it from the senior levels of government when and if they ever offer to let us do that. Okay, Jim, do you want to rush us through the rest of the agenda? Sorry, I think you're on mute now.
Thank you. Probably best thing to turn it over to David to take us through the remaining items.
Okay,
need to discuss.
Sure. Half of the agenda items were more for status update. So that covers off item 2 under schedule 2.2, 2.3, 2.4. We really do need to get that updated once we have a clear path forward. We've covered 3.1. 4.1 is really information. 5.1 building permit. We have from the Township of Malahide confirmation that the plan review is complete. There are no design revisions that will be needed, which is good news. So as Brian asked, when can we get a permit? But indication is that that wouldn't delay any construction start. The only thing we'd have to do is submit an amendment to any structural changes that we need to accommodate a start that has no renovation requirement. 6.0, the ministry approval. At this point, we do know that we need to get some electrical drawings submitted to the ministry, but other than that, there have been no comments that remain unresolved, or that there are no issues otherwise, but we don't have a definitive list of any other comments beside the door access control, which we knew needed further information. And that is the agenda, other than setting a tentative next meeting, which might be better proposed once we have an idea of how to solve the construction start without impacting the existing home. There are also need to have systems that extend from the existing core of the building to the addition, so that's not just structural. We'll also want to look at mechanical.
Okay, having said that, we're running pretty tight on time right now. Before I wrap it up with Julie and Jim about construction committee and what they want to see us doing on that, this meeting was really just to give us all a nudge and start us back trying to get this project on track. The next meeting, I'm going to ask that we have all the time available we need, because then we'll be really making decisions about moving forward or not moving forward, and serious decisions, because we'll have numbers in front of us for costs. We'll have obstacles in front of us after the investigation. It sounds simple that we can get this tour done, but it may not be that simple when we get down to the nitty-gritty of it. But we'll work with all of that kind of stuff at the next meeting, so we won't be rushed for time like we are today. This was more just to give us all a bit of a nudge and get us in agreement that we're going to start down the road to try and figure out how to get this project live again. Having said that, now I'll go around the table with the councillors in particular at the end if there's any further comments. But construction committee to be formed, I'm not quite sure I understood what that meant.
Once we actually get into construction, the steering committee was going to be not active on a monthly basis, and that there would be a new group of individuals that would have signing authority for decisions that involve costs over a certain threshold that staff wouldn't have capacity to approve.
Okay, that one I would rather toss to Jim and Julie and David to come back with a solid recommendation on who should be there and how that reporting should work. This committee, I see all of the real working people, the non-politicians, having to be part of that anyway. So you've got 3 politicians along as extra baggage. So I would urge you to maybe even look at us as that could be the same group, because I don't think we'll get in the way. As we do now, you have operational meetings in between our meetings. So we would manage by exception as opposed to any kind of micromanagement, and call the meetings when you need approval on funds like that. I'm a little uncomfortable passing on the funds without a representation, at least with the warden level being there, okay? So can we, I'll just ask the councillors, is it all right we toss that back to them to give us a real recommendation on how that would work and who would be on it? You okay with that, Dave?
I'm with that idea, Bob, and I agree, especially when it comes to the budget part, that there should be a certain amount of discretion that staff has, but especially if it's an overrun, we need to be.
Okay, and Mary, did you have some comments?
I agree with what Dave just said.
Okay, and Tom?
I'm on side.
Okay, Jim,
Mr.
are you
Chair?
happy you got enough direction to, we can adjourn and then you can call a full-blown meeting to get us the project started again?
Yes, certainly. I think on the committee and that discussion, I think one thing to keep in mind is we're showing that we can do these meetings virtually. So if there was an urgent matter come up, I think we can turn these meetings around in very quick order if we're setting up a virtual meeting. So I think that will address the concerns of keeping this project moving when issues arise. I think as the next step, if staff could stay on the line and we can perhaps just address a couple of the issues of our next, what we're going to do from the staff level moving forward, and then we'll get back to you on a next meeting date once we work through those plans, as you said.
Okay, are the rest of the members of the committee, the members of county council, willing to leave now, and then we'll let them carry on? And the next meeting, we'll let you know when it's going to happen, once they're in a position to provide the kind of information we're going to need to make some decisions. Is that good?
Yeah, I'm good with that, Tom.
Okay, I'm going to leave, and all the other county councilors will leave, and we'll let you guys tidy things up for us. And again, thank you for your cooperation, keeping this fast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks.
Okay, take care, folks.